how to make it better. Awesome. Okay, so I forgot to change the date. That's last week. Thank God we're feeling better. So it is not September 6th anymore. But I want to thank everyone for coming. It's great that everyone's here. And topic is Torah and Creation. So there's going to be a lot of new information, exciting information, and we look forward to learning it with all of the YJC community. Everyone here, been enjoying all of our interactions together, and this is, I think, another step along the journey of partying and weddings and Shabbatones and a little bit of Torah also never hurt anyone, right? So, quick question just to start. Has anyone here read through the first chapter of Genesis?
It was a long time ago.
A long time ago.
I've read it at some point, yeah.
Any language, Hebrew, English, Chinese, any language. Mark has?
Yeah.
Mark has, okay. A couple people have? Okay, a few people have. So this is going to be obviously a learning experience. We're going to try to go throughout the next 4 classes the actual text of the Chumash itself inside, and through the text kind of gain the Torah's perspective on creation. But the Torah is definitely an amazing book, and we highly recommend it. It's it's the bestseller of all time. So if for no other reason, it's a good reason to read it. So that is our goal. As we start, I just want to give one word of introduction, and that is, I think Mark just said it, we are recording this. If anyone says that if that's going to affect people asking questions, then I'll turn off the recorder. It's very important for me, I think for everyone here, that people ask questions. Questions are great. I think people sometimes feel like embarrassed by questions. There is a Mishnah in Ethics of Our Fathers that says the embarrassed person will not learn. You're too embarrassed to ask, so you'll never learn. And you'd be surprised, most times you have a question, other people are probably also thinking of the question, they're embarrassed to ask. So please ask questions. I don't know everything either. We'll talk it out together. We'll work through it, and I think we all have a lot to gain if you raise your hand, even if you're not that cute. And not that anyone here is. Ask your questions. Make it open. This is a very open floor. If I say anything that sounds you don't like it, no one's going to call you a heretic. No one's going to be upset. No one's going to throw you out. This is a very open floor. Lots of new information, and let's do it together. So before we start, I think we have to just set up a few, introductions to learning Torah. If many of you that haven't read through the Chumash before, just to give a basic appreciation of what exactly it is, how it works, structure, before we dive into the actual text itself, which will be a little bit later. So the most basic question to start out with is, which of the following is our book? Is it the Old Testament, the New Testament, the, as quoted, Holy Quran, the Book of Mormon, all of the above, or none of the above 2016? Which one?
The first one.
Got 2 votes for the first one. We're missing a few votes still.
First one.
Universal? Everyone agrees?
That'd
Unanimous?
be a trick question.
Okay, go with the Quran then. Go.
I'm going to go with all of the above.
All of the above? Okay, that's an interesting guess. Maybe we'll talk about this afterwards. Anyone else? Which is the Jewish Bible? Which is our book? This one, you'll probably find this one in the synagogue much more than you'll find the other ones. However, I personally believe that the true answer is none of the above. Not just because it's none of the above 2016 Bible, but because the answer actually is none of the above. If you want to ask what is the Jewish Bible is not the Old Testament. The Jewish Bible is the Old Testament, which is the written law, in combination with the oral law. It is a joint partnership. It's 2 halves of one thing. To claim that this alone, if you just have the book by itself, that you'll understand anything and that you'll know anything, is wrong. This is not going to help you on its own. You need to have with the written law the oral law. Now, both of these 2 halves were divinely given to Moses on Mount Sinai. Who here knows how many days was Moses on Mount Sinai?
40.
40, perfect. So, Torah says in Exodus 24:18, Moses was on Mount Sinai for 40 days. And what was Moses doing for 40 days? I would give you this book, and I would ask you to just read it. And you don't have to eat, you don't have to sleep, you don't have to do anything. And you're isolated, and you're alone. How long do you would take you to read this book? What over there?
I'm going to guess 40 days.
Okay, 40 days.
In English?
In English, let's say.
Week and a half.
Week and a half, okay, so let's say 10 days? 10 and a half days? Okay, not crazy long, right? It shouldn't take you 40 days to read this. It's like, 400-page novel. Some of it's a little cryptic, but more or less, you can get it pretty quickly if that's all you were doing all day. But the oral law, what was actually happening on Sinai was God spent 40 days. He gave Moses the written law. He gave him the Torah. And then he added along with that, orally, it's supposed to be the oral law. There's just books here for good reason. That's a good point, but we can get to that. But it's supposed to be an oral law, and the oral law is the explanation of the written law. And it's two halves. The written law by itself really doesn't make any sense. You can't really understand. We'll get there in a second. So the oral law is a necessary component that combined with the written law creates a Jewish Bible. Yeah, question?
Yeah, I don't know if you want to pause it or not, but so
Don't want to pause it.
when you read the oral law, right, it's all like Rabbi Gamliel said this and the other rabbi said that. So when God spoke the oral law, was it something like that where it was communicated in that way? Or am I
So there are two things. Great question. That's a great question. The Talmud actually says that God told Moses every single thing that any Jew will ever create in Torah, including specific stories that goes into over there. The main thing that was passed down in terms of the oral law to Moses, he didn't know all that. The main thing he learned, though, was really the process. And the oral law is really a process of analysis and thinking and what's the word? Extrapolating, fancy other English words that you only use when you're talking about the Torah. Extrapolating the written law into practical application. So the oral law is really it's a process of understanding that allows you to apply it, in which case that allows room to have different opinions of how to extrapolate. It's given over to the Jews to figure that out, and God did actually, it says, told Moses all of the people's future opinions. In addition to, we find that we can kind of get into oral law as really like a class in and of itself, but the oral law was, so to speak, given over to the Jewish nation within a certain set of guidelines, of rules, to interpret it, using that system to interpret the written law. And that is given over to the mind of the rabbis, as long as you know how the system plays, and what's within the rules of the system, to interpret it as you want. The Gemara actually quotes that somebody once asked, I forgot which great rabbi was, found Elijah the prophet in the field, and he asked him, what's God learning now? Like, which piece of Torah is God working on? So he told him whatever the specific piece, and he said, there's what does God say about it? So he said, God said that my son Eliezer says like this, and my son, I forgot the name of the portrait of Yeshua, whoever it was, says like this. Meaning God was, so to speak, quoting the two opinions, the concept being that the oral law was given over to the Jewish nation to interpret the Torah based on the rules that God gave Moses how to do that. And as long as you're within that system, it's somewhat of like a live organism, the Torah, that the Jewish nation has to learn and develop, which is, you need a rabbi that teaches you how to do that, how to properly extract and apply the laws. But these two parts are completely together, inseparable, and because of that, we need to keep in mind, which we will as we read the first chapter of the Torah, the oral law in addition. On the Chumash, if you look at regular Chumash, I don't have one on that shelf there, every Chumash just about has Rashi on the page with Chumash. Rashi is like a commentary underneath it. What Rashi basically does is he adds in the oral law to the written law. He'll try to make more sense. Certain points in time, you read the verse and it won't make sense. So then you'll say, well, what does the written law mean? And you'll see at the bottom, Rashi will add in a quote from somewhere else of the oral law to help explain that. That's really what Rashi does. Rashi's kind of like your friend who helps. You have to memorize everything yourself. He kind of puts it in there for you so you can find the proper application. The question is, why do we need a system like this? Why did God make it that we have to have like two halves of this? Why not just have the written law and just write it all out? Why do we have to have part of it orally? So the answer is, like we were saying, first of all, does anybody know the man's? I really think that looks like the dollar. No knows? Anyone? If it's from Google Images, I really think. Okay. Anyways, so the question is why, and the answer is because, like we said before, you can't have the written law and oral law are two halves, and they can't exist by themselves. The written law, the oral law, the amount of applications. Let's take an example. Somebody throw out an example of what appears to be a very clear, simple to understand mitzvah that doesn't really need any oral law. The Torah kind of explains it. Any good ideas?
Respect your parents.
Respect your parents. Okay, great question. Respect your parents. So now let's say your parents tell you to go steal something from someone. So do you respect your parents, or do you steal from them? How do we rate that? What does respecting your parents mean? Let's say your parents are berating you or they're abusing you, does it apply to all scenarios or is there a limit to it? Or what's considered respect? Let's say your parent demands that you buy them a Ferrari. You're obligated to spend all the money you have in the world to get something for your parents. So even a pretty clear cut, like we have somewhat of an idea of what does it mean to respect a parent. It's pretty clear. But at the same time, when you bring it down to real life application, with the questions that people ask that come up, like this is a real life application, like let's say life support. I don't know, your parents are dying. Is it respect for your parents to end their life? Or I don't know, anything. When it comes to real life, there's like all of a sudden a million questions, and like, well, the Torah just says you should respect them. So I don't know, is it respectful to do what they say, or is it respectful to do what's right if there's a conflict? Right? So it's hard. Any other examples?
Don't kill.
Don't kill. Okay, so don't kill.
But even that has an exception because if your own life is in danger, right?
Your own life danger, or let's say capital punishment. So I don't know if everyone's aware of this or not, but the Torah does believe in capital punishment. So if don't kill means don't ever kill, then how could you, right next to that, capital punishment? So is it do not kill or is it do not murder? And what about abortion? Is abortion killing or is it not killing? Or, here's a nice one that Gemara says. Imagine you're on the Empire State Building and you, not you, God forbid, but somebody pushes their friend off the Empire State Building and they're for sure going to die when they hit the bottom. It's not possible they're going to stay alive. And there's another great man on the 15th floor who sticks a sword out and slices his head off. So who killed him? Did the guy on top kill him? Because he was going to die when he pushed him off. Or did the guy who cut his head off on the bottom kill him? And this is the Talmud actually discusses this exact question. It doesn't say Empire State Building, but other than that. So who's the murderer, right? How do we define it? When you come to real life, there's crazy cases. You go read murder cases, there's crazy cases. So when you push comes to shove in real life application, there's so many nuances, there's so many details. It's not possible to write down every single case that's ever gonna come up ever. So you have to have a system, which is an oral law, which is a system that allows you to have all the rules are in front of you in this written law. And God gave it over with a system of interpreting it and extracting it that will allow you to apply it to any situation that will ever come up. And that's what the oral law is, and that's why it's so important to have both aspects of it, because that will allow you to adapt to any situation that will come up. If everything was written and there was no oral law, and something happened that wasn't in the Bible, or as life moves on to modern times, and you have electricity, and you have, I don't know, other things, how do we interact with that? So there's no verse in the Torah about that, but we have to figure out the principle, and then figure out how to extract that from the Torah itself. And that's really what the reason why we have to have an oral law is, because it's endless applications. And there's a point about oral law. So really, it's not like everything really works with oral law. Oral law is basically part of life. Like let's take, for example, anyone know what this is?
A.
Who said that? David. Give this guy a round of applause. This is an A. Excellent. How do you know?
That's what I was told.
So you were told, okay. Maybe they lied to you.
Who cares?
Who cares? Okay, maybe it's really a D and we're all just saying the wrong thing. How do you know? Maybe it's a zim,
Who cares?
not even a D. You know, it's a made up word. What?
Who cares?
Okay, I mean, you're just saying that it doesn't really matter as long as we all know what we're talking about. Okay, could be. But we all do agree at the same time that this is an A. And I hit the button. Okay, so So the answer is that there's an unspoken oral law with basically all passing of information. There's certain things that are assumed that we just know in the passing of things that just exist. Why is it A? Because someone told you it's an A. We have no reason to assume that they're lying to us. So it's an A, right? All information necessitates a somewhat level of an oral. I'll give you another example. What was Humpty Dumpty?
An egg.
An egg? Everyone agrees Humpty Dumpty was an egg? Okay, so let's speak. Everyone remember the poem? Humpty Dumpty, Humpty Dumpty,
Had a great fall.
all the king's horses and all the king's men. So how do you know he was an egg? He was on a wall, he fell, and they couldn't put him together. He could have been a coffee mug, he could have been a vase, he could have been a light bulb, he could have been anything. How do we all know, and we're all so confident that Humpty Dumpty was an egg?
It's the picture.
How do we know?
Someone saw him.
It's just an oral tradition, right? We all accept it. There's certain information that there's just an oral tradition, so to speak, it's equivalent of it, that it's not we just interpret things in a certain way. So it's actually interesting if you go on Wikipedia, Humpty Dumpty, and you look at the tradition of where he became an egg. It's not so clear that he was originally intended as an egg. Not necessarily important for right now, but we all know and we all agree that he was an egg, and that's just part of information passed on. That's how the oral law works, right? There's assumptions we have, and that's how it works. Again, I want to emphasize that the oral law is not adding anything to the Torah. Just like in Humpty Dumpty, the oral law didn't change anything in Humpty Dumpty, it just explained it. He's an egg. Right? What is Humpty Dumpty? He's an egg. The exact same way that works, or what is an A? It's an A, right? It's a name for it. It's not changing the A or changing what it does. It's an added explanation of the A. That's what oral law is. And the same way in our sense, the oral law didn't add to the Torah. God gave the Torah to Moses with a system of interpreting it and understanding it. It didn't add. Nothing's added in the oral law. The oral law adds nothing. It's merely a partnership with the written law to make it real, to make it usable, that allows us to now use the written law in all real life applications from A to Z. And that's what the oral law's purpose really is. The next basic question is, what exactly is Torah? Right? We're sitting down, we're going to start learning Torah. And we're starting chapter 1, some of us have never read it before. And what are we doing? What is this? What is Torah? Like, why do the rabbis always tell us to come on Torah? Like, why don't they leave us alone? Like, why do they always, what's so great? Why do they like the Torah so much? Anyone know? Open to the crowd. No wrong answers. That could be a wrong answer. I think that we don't mind wrong answers.
System of living.
System of living. Great answer.
God's communication to us.
God's communication to us.
Book of history and laws.
Book of histories and laws. Love them all so far. The women are being very quiet. You guys can talk up also. You know we're an equal opportunity class.
What did we learn in New York?
Busted.
Women.
Exactly, the woman. No, but we know the husband's answers because the women were making them. They taught them everything.
I look
we
at
know.
Eli and he knows what to say.
Exactly. You taught him well. You taught him well, Barbara. So what is Torah? So Torah is actually God's mind. Kabbalah teaches us that the way God thinks, that's actually what the Torah is. Torah is the God's mind. So therefore, when we're reading the Torah, we're actually reading God's mind. Like one rabbi put it, like what's the difference between praying and learning Torah? Praying is when we talk to God. When I talk to God, we pray to God. Learning Torah is God talking to us. Right? It's God telling us how He thinks. Concept being that God is the greatest being ever, period. So if we can understand how He thinks, how He works, how He's great, that can allow us, purpose being for us, to be able to make ourselves great in that same way as God, right? That is really the purpose of the Torah. And interestingly, the Torah is actually an abbreviation of a different word. And the Torah is actually short for the word Torat Chayim, which literally means, or Torah Chaim, which literally means the instructions for life. Let's see here. The concept is basically that God is perfect and God is great and God wants us coming into this world. The world is difficult, the world is complicated. Have some sort of structure that will allow you to develop yourself. We're kind of like a piece of clay that's just like unmolded and unchanged, and we have to form ourselves and fashion ourselves into a great person. And God assists us in this. And God says, I'll help you form yourself to be a great person. I'll help you do that by what? By learning how yourself to be great, which is Torah. That's really the purpose of Torah. The purpose of Torah is to help you turn yourself into the greatest person that you could be. And that is what Torah is. Now, imagine God, just for a second, exactly bring out what exactly Torah does. Imagine God as like this extreme infinite ball of energy. Just like, I feel like energy is like somewhat of like a physical term that we can use, kind of like spiritual, kind of physical. Like no one really knows what energy is, but it's kind of like that. So imagine God as this like endless energy source that's just like pumping into life, into other things. So there was a famous Jew. It's interesting that he was the first Jew that came up in the Torah class, but he was. Famous Jew. Everyone recognizes this person? Famous what? Albert Einstein, right? So Albert Einstein had a famous theory. It might be too late to start discussing this, but he had a famous theory called the theory of relativity, which many people have seen before. E equals mc squared, N 5, right? So does anyone here familiar with theory? Anyone know what it actually means? Other than a building on like Preston and like whatever that is, that has big.
Energy equals mass times the speed of light squared.
Okay, perfect. What does that mean? Can we interpret that for the layman?
Energy is no, I can't. I lied.
So it took me, I had to do a lot to finally get this.
Yeah.
Well, this is what Mark was just saying, right? E is energy, that's what E stands for. M is mass, meaning the size of an item, whatever the item is. C, I don't know why this is, but C is the speed of light. Which that is the speed of light. And then if you want to know the amount of energy inside of any item, so if you take the size of that item, the mass of that item, and you multiply it by the speed of light squared, that's the amount of energy contained inside of any item. Which means that if you have a teeny tiny little molecule, tiny bit of any mass, there's a tremendous amount of energy behind it, almost infinite amount of energy behind it, right? Because if you take 10 to the 8th power times 3 is already a huge number, and if you multiply that by, I don't know, however big one of us are, that's tremendous. This is the concept of the atom bomb. That's what came out from this, right? The amount of energy, if you can tap into the energy inside of an amount of mass, so that energy, if you could bring that out, will create a tremendous explosion. Because every single mass, every single thing in the world, from people to water bottles, tables to any atom, is really combined together, so to speak. Best word I can come up with is like it's kind of like the glue that holds it together. And when you can release that, it's almost infinite. So if you kind of imagine God as this energy, I hope this isn't heretical. It's a good explanation. That there is energy inside of all of us and everything in the world, almost infinite energy, which is an amazing thing if you think about it. Some people like to say that E equals mc squared is proof of God. We'll get more to the Big Bang later, but Albert Einstein himself actually said that Albert Einstein didn't believe in the Big Bang. He opposed the Big Bang theory, but he said that if the Big Bang theory is ever proven correct, then that is a proof that God exists. That's what Albert Einstein said. But there's a lot of interesting things. So this theory basically says that there's almost an infinite amount of energy in every single thing. So if we can imagine God as an infinite energy source that's kind of pumping into this world, it's almost as if when you slow down mass to a certain amount, right, when it's going times the speed of light times 2, it can really, energy somewhat slowed down can actually turn into a mass. And that's really what energy is. So just a way to like bring it out. So the Torah is meant to help us guide. We have this energy, we have this like spiritual energy inside of us. The Torah is meant to help us form ourselves, form our mass in congruence with this energy. That it should all fit together, right? We have this infinite energy inside of us. We should connect that to mass. Does that make any sense to anyone? Or did I totally lose everyone? Because you look like I totally lost you.
I'm just pregnant. Go Daniel.
I hear that. Does anyone, does that make sense? Do you not want to understand it? Is that good?
We could have taught high school physics.
It took me a while to get this, so I feel like I understood it well enough to say it over, so I'm not sure that it's coming over. It's good. Everyone's got it. Okay. That is an amazing thing. And what is energy? So science doesn't really have any explanation of what energy is. When the Big Bang came out, according to science, it was created with a certain amount of energy. That energy is unchangeable. There's a certain amount of energy that exists in the world. You can transform energy from one type to another type, but you can never change energy. You can't create energy or lose energy. So what is energy? We don't really know. It's a term that was created by the Big Bang. I think if you can just kind of imagine that as God, it's almost like a explicit explanation of God in the world that I think is a pretty interesting thing. The last intro, and then we're gonna stop. So, is the Torah divine? Open to the floor. Is the Torah divine? Some Segal thinks it is. Okay. Glad to hear it. But I personally do believe the Torah is divine. How many people here believe, and this part's not being recorded, you can just raise your hand and nobody will ever know. How many people here believe that the Torah is divine? Questions are normal, they're healthy, you don't have to be. I'm the rabbi, you could be honest, we're all one happy YJC family over here, everything's good.
What do you define as?
Given by God. Given by God. Was the Torah given by God to humanity? Okay, so some people are more confident. I personally am very confident. No doubt, confidence is always divine, but it is a very normal thing to not be sure of that. And the question is, why do I ask this? So the reason I ask this is because if we're now going to go ahead and learn the Torah, so I think that if we would believe or recognize that it's divine, it makes the study a lot more meaningful. All of a sudden, this is not just like a really smart person in this book, but it's God who wrote this book. Like it's just a different world. When we're looking at the text, every nuance makes such a difference when you're recognizing that God wrote it. If a person wrote it, it's okay, he wrote it like this, he wrote it like that. But if God writes it, every nuance makes such a big difference to it. So, I want to start a little exercise. And the exercise is called If You Were God. So, I'm sure everyone has an easy time imagining themselves as God. If you were God, and you were writing a Bible, and you were giving it to this nation that you took out of Egypt, these are all facts. So far, this is not based on belief. This is just a scenario. I'm throwing out an exercise here. Imagine yourself as God. You took a nation out of Egypt. You had them by the mountain. You're revealing yourself to them, and you're giving them a book. And you're God, so you know everything, right? And you know that in 2016, there's going to be a few people sitting at 5732 Harvest Hill trying to figure out, is it divine? Is it not? Is this real? Is it not? And you know that because you're God, right? Like God should know what's going to be in the future. So he knows there's going to be doubters. So here's the exercise. If you were God, and you know there's going to be doubters in the future, and you have a one chance, you're doing a one-time thing, never to be changed, to give a book to humanity as your book to guide them, what would you do to make sure that in the future, people would recognize this book as your book? If you're God.
Like, would you reveal yourself to all of them so then it's not just like one person?
You're saying at the original time?
At the original time.
Perfect. So you goes out to all of them at the original time. That is one of the great claims that Judaism has, unlike any other nation, that all other religions have started as an individual who got a prophecy from God, or later people who claimed that an individual had a prophecy from God, and that individual started a whole branch. Right? God appeared to Muhammad, God appeared to John Smith, God appeared to, or however they understand Jesus happened, was a little bit different, but more or less it was never a national revelation. National revelation is a uniquely Jewish concept. We claim, and everyone agrees, that there were 3 million people that roughly that saw God, and that's something that'd be hard to pass on if it didn't happen. It's unlikely. So that definitely is something that God did to ensure that. And what else could this add on? What else could God do in the book? How could God give this book in a way that the book itself will kind of, this is God's book? In addition to just, they're my people and I appear to them, and the whole cause is kind of like what they say is right because I'm there, how could he identify the book as his own book also? In addition to that, I think what you said was awesome. In addition, how else could you idea that this book was what I gave to them? That this book is real and that was at that revelation. You want to say something?
I was going to say, make it cryptic so that it can be interpreted differently so it remains relevant.
Okay, but how do we know that God did that and not
Wrote it in first person.
someone else? So anyone could write a book and say, it's God speaking. Right? That doesn't prove that it's God. So if you were God, how could you prove, or how could you ID that this book is yours?
You could put in verifiable prophecies every 50 years, something, just tell the future.
Okay, you can tell the future.
But even then, how much of that could be due to coincidence?
I mean,
I think it depends on the circumstance. Like,
no, I mean, you could say, like, earthquake will happen in 2018 here, and, famine here. I don't know. I'm saying, it would make it a lot more easy to believe if you could verify that,
but isn't part of like believing like taking things on faith though?
Well, sure, and that's why it's belief.
Well,
That's a great question. That's a great conversation. All parts of it. I'm going to go in the direction of Mark, and what you have is a great point. The question is, where exactly does belief start? And is it really belief or is it knowledge? Judaism is very knowledge-focused and less belief-focused once you actually look at it. Judaism is actually, we don't claim that we just believe, we claim that we know. Judaism is a nation that knows. In regard to what Mark was saying, if you were God, this is what I would do if I were God, along the lines of Mark, is say something, write something that only you as God could know. So either you could thing explicit, like in 2018 there's going to be an earthquake, right? Or you have to write something that nobody else would claim to do, right? Take the Torah and put your fingerprint on it, right? Say this is clearly mine because who else would claim such a thing if not for God? And here's an amazing thing. If you look, regarding what you said, it could be a coincidence, right? That's the easy question. So if you look in all other religions, and I challenge everyone to look, I did my best looking myself in preparation of the class, but I challenge everyone else. The class doesn't end when we leave here. Anything that I said, or if you want to look into more and get back to me, I'd love to hear more comments and stuff from it afterwards. But if you look at every other religion, what do they promise you for following that religion? What do they promise you if you keep their Bible? If you keep their book? What?
Something positive.
Something positive. And what is it?
This life.
Yeah.
Something positive next life.
Right, so let's see. Christianity, if you believe in Jesus, then you go to heaven. So now you have eternal damnation, right? And that's Christianity. Muslim, if you do the right stuff, you get 70 virgins and rivers of flowing wine and milk. And, I forgot the milk part. So you get rivers, I forgot how many, 7 rivers of flowing wine and 7 rivers of milk, I think. Tell me if you're a guy, no woman gets how much heaven is.
He doesn't like milk.
But if you look through it, all of the promises of every other religion other than Judaism in their Bible only promises things that exist outside once you have left this world. There's not a promise in any other religious books. What?
How about reincarnation?
So reincarnation, again, it's something that you can't ever really prove that it happens, right? Now, I can't prove that the book is wrong. All I'm saying is like this. If you're God and you're writing a book and you want to prove this book is yours, prove it. How do you prove it? Write something, idea, or write something in your book that you put yourself on the line. How could you say this unless you're God? Because it's a risk. If you say something and you're wrong, people are going to be like, oh, we were following this the whole time, and then you said that. Like, this can't be from God. So the easy way out is just don't write anything in your book about this world. And you can just write that if in the next world it'll be great, and in the next world you get this, and you can be reincarnated as a cow, and whatever else can happen if you do good stuff. But no one ever really knows because no one's there anymore conveniently when it makes a difference. If you look in the Torah, you will find many, I'll bring out a couple of them now, examples of information about this world that is identifiable, that you can say that would be foolish to claim if it wasn't real, because you'll just be proven wrong. So why not take the safe path, like every other religion did, and go that way? So, let's go number 1. Fingerprint number 1. Leviticus 11:4-7. Anyone know what it says over there?
Sure.
Leviticus 11, chapter 11 in Leviticus is the laws of kosher animals. 11:4-7 speaks out the rules of a kosher mammal. 2 things kosher animals have to have. Anyone know what they are?
Cloven hooves and chew
Right? What's got that? Chew their cuds and have split feet. 2 things. Split hooves. So the Torah lists specifically 3 animals that chew their cud and don't have split hooves. Those are the camel, the hyrax, and the hare. And the Torah lists, if you want to know what that is, and the Torah lists camel, the hyrax, and the hare. Might be backwards. What's the hare? What's the hyrax?
What's a hyrax?
Yeah, it's like a little round
What's that?
or something.
This?
What is it? What kind of
Wikipedia.
I would
It's an animal.
It's adorable.
Not sure what family it's from, but look it up. And there's only the Torah lists only 1 animal that has split hooves and does not chew its cud, and that is the pig, right? Now, the Torah claims that these are the only animals. If you look into the whole animal kingdom anywhere in the world, you'll only find 3 animals that exist in the world that chew their cud and do not have split hooves. To the extent that the Gemara says we have a rule that you have to slaughter an animal that has split hooves and chew its cud. If you slaughter it properly, you can eat it. Let's say you find an animal that has split hooves, but you're not sure if it chews its cud or not. You just can't tell because you're not looking inside of the animal. I don't know, you can't tell. So the Torah says, that the Gemara rules, this is the halacha, this is the law, that you know that there are only 3 animals that chew their cud, there's only 1 animal that has split hooves and does not chew its cud. So if it has split hooves, you know that it's kosher, and vice versa. If you know it chews its cud, and it doesn't have split hooves, if it chews its cud, then you know it's kosher if you slaughter it, even if you're not sure exactly if it has split hooves or not. You can't tell well, as long as it's not one of these 3 animals. And that's the law. The Torah claims, and for 2,000 years, this has been, as far as we know, no one's proven the Torah wrong from this so far, that these are the only animals. Now, that's a pretty crazy thing to say, because if you just go out and find another animal, then It's like busted. Like, why say that? Just don't say it. Just say you need to have split hooves and chew your cud and you're fine. Like, why do you need to go ahead and say that these are the ones that don't? Why do you have to exceptions? There's plenty of animals, by the way, that don't have split hooves or chew their cud. Those are many, and the Torah doesn't mention them. But specifically that have one and not the other are the ones that the Torah mentions in both directions. So, well, write that. So the answer is, because if you're God, and you know, you can write it. Fascinating. Look into it. Don't believe me. Look at everything I'm telling you. I'm responsible for what I say, not just for the next 20 minutes, but afterwards as well. This is Leviticus 11:4-7, fingerprint number 1, directed in the Torah. Fingerprint number 2, Leviticus 11:9-10. So after the kosher animals, it goes to kosher fish. What are the rules of kosher fish?
Scales.
Scales and fins. Scales and fins. It has to have scales and fins, right? Nice kosher animal, feels nice animal, got some scales, got some fins. Perfect kosher animal. Here's a nice not kosher animal. It has fins, but has no scales.
And it's lunch.
And what?
It's eating its lunch.
Yeah, but yeah,
Come for it.
It's also been killed.
What?
Spearing it. I took my pictures off the wall in order to fit the screen on.
Screw
So
it.
what kind we got. It's been stabbed. The Torah claims, in another amazing admission of knowledge, that every fish you'll ever find that has scales on it will have fins. You will not find an animal that has scales but does not have fins. It doesn't exist. And therefore, if you see an animal that has scales, you know that it has fins on it. Which is why, for example, theoretically, we talked about this a little bit in the kosher class. Let's say that you see an animal that you're in a fish market that's not kosher, and you're talking about a fish that was not processed and has no flavorings on it and is totally raw, untouched by anything that could be not kosher, and you see skins on it, scales on it, you can be certain it's a kosher fish, because if it has scales on it, you know it has fins. And that's also a halacha. You can be certain, as long as you see scales, that it has fins, and you don't need to see the whole fish, and you can know it's kosher. Now again, why would you say this? It's stupid. Just say fins and scales is kosher. You don't have to say anything else to stop that. Why say, by the way, you should know that in the entire world, even though this was 3,000 years ago, and we probably discovered 10 million fish since then, you will not find a fish that has scales, but no fins. It's a crazy thing to say, unless you're God and you created the world, and you know what fish exist, and then you can easily say whatever you want. No other religion claims such a thing. Period. Look for it. You won't find it. Only in the Torah do you find such a concept. Fingerprint number 2. We'll do a couple. There are more, but come back Friday night, Shabbos meal, we'll talk about more then. Exodus 34:24. What is that? There's an interesting law in the Torah. And this law does this look familiar to anybody? Anyone seen this picture before? This is a picture of the temple when it was built. This is the basic structure of the temple. And this is representative of 3 different holidays. Right? The matzah is Pesach, this is the Torah, which is Shavuos, and this is the Hutz coming up in a few more weeks, the holiday of Sukkot. Now the Torah has an obligation during the times of the temple, so unfortunately we can't do this anymore. During the time of the temple, the Torah writes that there are 3 points in time during the year when you have to, all men above the age of bar mitzvah, have to go to Jerusalem, to the temple, to visit God. God says, I want you to visit me 3 times a year. I don't want to be alone. Maybe you can live far away, you can be wherever you are. 3 times a year, I want to make sure you come back and you connect to me. Now, the Torah was written, this is in the written law, and anybody can know this, and every surrounding nation knows that across the entire map of Israel, every single city, from top to bottom, minus one city in the middle called Jerusalem, will have absolutely no male above the age of 13 in them during this 7-day period. I mean, it's like a crazy thing. I don't think Esther just falling for bed. It's a crazy. She's okay. She's fine. It's a crazy thing, right? Some women are home, some women can't, but some women sit home. The kids are there. Any enemy, it's like the perfect time to attack, right? There is no protection in any of the cities. And God writes, the explicit verse, 34:24 in Exodus, it says, I want you to come visit me 3 times a year, and don't be nervous about your enemies, because I will make sure that they do not attack you. That's a crazy thing to say. Just going to make sure they won't attack you? How are you going to make sure they won't attack you? If you're God, just make sure they won't attack you. I don't know, you run the world. You'll make sure they won't attack you. But it says in the Torah, in this world, when you go to Jerusalem, you will not be attacked. Explicit. Anyone, again, I forgot to mention one thing before. Everything I'm saying is directly coming from the written law or the oral law interpretation of the written law. I'm not adding anything, and if anything I said sounds like interesting or shocking or whatever, I'm happy to show you any of the sources inside. Anything that you want to see inside, I can give you. If it's in English, I can show it to you in English. But really, anything is, look it up and I can show you it inside. So Exodus 34:24 explicitly says, nobody will attack you. Now, I guess we can't really see this in 2016. We're not traveling the temple and leaving our cities. But I think it's logical to say that there was a 700-year period, roughly, where they did do this, and I believe that's historically proven, or we have proofs of that from archaeological digs and stuff, that people did do such things, and we don't have any stories of them getting attacked and destroyed, and we also don't find that they left the Torah. I mean, if you came home and your city was destroyed, would you believe in the Torah anymore? The Torah says you can go and you'll be fine, and you come home and everything's destroyed. You give up your faith, you wouldn't believe that anymore. Actually, God guaranteed it to you. We don't find that they ever gave up on the Torah. The Torah has traveled with us through all the generations. So, Exodus 34:24, another explicit example, fingerprint number 3, explicit example in this world, God guaranteeing stuff which doesn't make sense because, again, we see in all the other religions, you don't have to guarantee anything for people to follow you. No one guaranteed anything in Christianity, and just like, they're doing fine. They got plenty of followers, a lot more than we have. Right? So you don't have to do it. You could have just left it. But no, God's IDing his book. God wants to know, this is my book. I gave this to you, and it's real. This is the last one we'll do tonight. We can discuss some more some other time. And that is Leviticus 25:21. This is another amazing, amazing, amazing law. Is anyone here familiar with the laws of Shemitah? Anyone heard of that before?
Stephen would like to take a Shemitah, actually. Yes.
Of work, right? You gotta be a farmer to get the biblical Shemitah. You have to be a farmer.
Go, people.
It's easier said than done. It's hard work. But so want to tell us what it is? What's a Shemitah?
Well, I believe, I'm sure there's more to it, but just every 7 years it's a cycle, and on the 7th year or after 7 years you take a sabbatical sort of break, and it's supposed to that time then like re-energizes or reinvigorates for the next 7 years.
Perfect. Everyone got that? So basically, the Jewish nation was always a farming nation. That's what they were. Like a lot of the laws are regarding farming. God tells them a crazy thing. This is probably the craziest thing you can tell a nation. Every 7 years, you're all going to just stop working. You're going to take off and you're just going to go to yeshiva for a year. Right? You can't work your fields. You're not allowed to work your fields. You can't plant, you can't sow, you can't thresh. You can't do anything. Just leave your field totally desolate. Now, let's even say that this is a wise thing that different farmers have claimed. Now we've proven that it's good to have your field rest. Let's just use our math brains for a few seconds. If 1/7 of the country every year would not work, then throughout 7 years, the entire country would have rested a year, right? And all of the land would regenerate itself and everything, and we'd always have 6/7 of the land to give food to everyone, right? But if the entire nation doesn't plant, so there's no food. What are you supposed to eat? If everyone stops at the same time, why don't we break it up? Every year a 7th doesn't plant. Then across 7 years, everyone rested for a year, everyone had time to go to yeshiva, learn to Torah for a year, and then you have 6/7 of the nation that can still supply food to that 7th. But God doesn't say that. God says, every 7th year, every single person, you're all no food production in Israel. It's like crazy. What are you going to eat? So God says, the lesson is, God's showing you this now, so I want you to recognize that your livelihood that you have comes from me. And even when you're working for it, I'm really the one behind everything. And therefore, I want everyone to take off 1 year, once every 7th year. And the verse says explicitly, look it up, Leviticus 25:21. I didn't read verses because I have a general rule that I don't like reading things. I find it boring when I'm listening to speeches that people are reading to me. So I didn't read them. If you want, we could look them all up afterwards. I could show you them. But it says explicitly, look it up, Leviticus 25:21, that maybe you're going to ask that what are we going to eat? And I forgot to add one thing, I don't know if it's necessary, but every 50th year is also like the equivalent of another year off. So basically every 7 years you're off. So year 7, year 14, year 21, 28. Then when you get to year 49, year 50 is the exact same thing. So you actually have 2 years in a row, year 49 and year 50, where for a 2-year period, nobody's allowed to work the field, nothing's allowed to be produced. And God says, explicitly, 25 and 21, don't worry, I will make sure you all have food. If you keep the Shemitah, you will all have enough food. The food will actually triple the year before, blessing, and you will have enough food for that 3-year span. The 2 years are missing, and until you can actually get more food and have that produce again. Which is, again, a crazy thing, because if you're living there, and you believe the Torah, and God didn't give you any food, and you lost kids to starvation, you wouldn't believe the Torah anymore. You wouldn't. It's an empty promise. Why does God say that? It's an explicit verse in the Torah. Why? Because when you're God, you can say that, right? God can claim that. And that is a fascinating thing. This is 4 proofs. So we stop here in terms of the proofs. And look into it. These are deep concepts. This is very interesting. We haven't heard this before. It's just an amazing thing to think about. That look around. I went to a few Muslim websites, tried figuring out what they promised. Then they told me I have to add in more information. One of my email address, my phone number, so I stopped. I was like chatting with someone. But
So did you mess with it?
yeah, I've heard this before, and I'm trying to, everything I try to prepare stuff, I try to validate everything I'm saying. I'm not trying to, I Googled Muslim reward for keeping Quran and got to a few websites, and one of them has said, do you want to chat? Do you have any questions? So I said, yeah, I have a question. I want to chat. And as far as I know, none of the other religions, based on my research, and I'm happy for anyone to show me more, not trying to hide behind anything here, makes any promise towards anything in this world, which is an amazing thing the Torah does. As far as we know, all of them were totally kept. All of the Jews who know this have happened still believe in the Torah, and these are just amazing for just
When was the last time this was tested, do you think?
Shemitah.
No, like fingerprint number 4. Like how many years ago?
That is Shemitah.
Yeah, so the Shemitah stopped. What Shemitah is dependent on, it's called a mitzvah tliyas, or it's one of the commandments that are dependent on the land of Israel. Shemitah only exists when you're living in Israel. If you own a farm in Texas, there's no concept of Shemitah cycle. It's a concept of the land of Israel. Part of a divine aspect. It's not going to really come up here so much, the land of Israel in this series, but the land of Israel is more of a spiritually in tuned land that can work with you, so to speak. When you keep the Torah, it produces the right way. That's something that's a unique concept to the land of Israel. So it only existed when the Jews were living in Israel and they had a temple.
But Shemitah's still around.
Shemitah's around rabbinically nowadays. It's not biblical. There is still a rabbinic concept of Shemitah nowadays, which does exist in Israel. You'll find, actually, past year was a Shemitah year. Past year? I think it's past year, 2 years ago? 2 years ago. And there are a lot of farmers, you can Google it online, a lot of interesting articles. There are a lot of farmers that take off the year. But again, that's a rabbinical thing, and you have to keep that. I don't know if the rabbinical expansion of the biblical verse has the same promise. The rabbis weren't God. The rabbis themselves wouldn't make promises because they can't control it. God can control it. So there is a biblical thing to keep it tested. I think you'd have to go back a little bit further, but now you officially have homework for the next class. The Yitz find out when was the last time that the Shemitah cycle was observed, and did they all die? 2 questions.
Did they all what?
Did they all die, or did God give them food? Very straightforward. Okay, so...
Year's a long time.
What?
A year's a long time. Just a long time.
Here's a really long time, and it's not just that. It lasts until you can plant the next year, because you don't. Even when that year ends, you don't have anything yet, because your fields are dead. You have to then go plant, and then planting and growth also takes time.
Would only the men go, or
Shemitah was. What do you mean go?
like to was it yeshiva? You
Oh,
said?
so there's no Okay, I added that in unfairly. Good call. It doesn't say explicitly that you should leave your land fallow and go to yeshiva. The concept is, the oral law explains the concept is, all the Torah says is you can't touch your land for the year. You can't grow anything, you can't do anything to develop the land. So the concept being to recognize it's a year off to refocus. It's kind of like a Shabbos, right? We have 6 days of the week, and we have Shabbos to refocus ourselves. We spoke about, like on the past Shabbat, we discussed about Shabbos, where you got to figure out who you want to be, rather than just doing and becoming whatever society tells you to be, but you kind of sit back and reflect, who do you want to be? So Shemitah is like an expanded Shabbos. It's like you work for 6 years, and then on the 7th year, you take a year off of self-reflection. And I don't know if there's no official go to yeshiva, but during that year, you kind of have the ability now to go back and you have the freedom and the time to connect to God. And God tells you, don't worry, I'll take care of your livelihood. You'll be okay. So that's the concept. Okay, so those are our introductions. decent amount of introductions, but I think that to start understanding the Torah properly, it does need to understand the proper frame of mind. So let's make a quick start. Does this look familiar? This is the first page inside of the blue chumash, the one that was up there before. It's actually, I think there's one over there, Mark. Is there one over there? It's like second top shelf, all the way at the end, right? You have a... Yeah, perfect. So this is the book we held before. This is half of the Bible, right? This is the written law. So that is just we open it up. So again, this is the words of the Torah itself. That's this one part here. This is Rashi, like I said before. Rashi is the primary commentary on the Torah, which again, what he's doing is he's bringing in the oral law to explain the simple understanding of the verses. And then there's other, the English, somewhat literal translation of this, and then just general commentary. As the years have gone on, obviously a lot of commentary has been written to explain and interpret the Torah. So this is the first bit of the Torah. Let's get started officially with some actual Torah and creation. Start with the first verse. This is we'll get more about it. The first verse of the Torah is, you know the first verse of the Torah in English? I just posted it.
I know it says in the beginning.
In the beginning,
God created the heavens and the earth.
God created the heavens and the earth. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, which in Hebrew is Bereshis, which means in the beginning. Bara Elohim, God created Es Hashemayim Es Haaretz, the heavens and the earth. Right? First verse of the Torah. So something unique about Torah, the Hebrew language is also somewhat unique to other languages as well. The Hebrew language is the language of God, like the Torah is the Torah of God, and it has various layers of understanding. Like it's not just a means. General language is just a means of, like we said before, who cares as long as we all know it's an A. It's an A. We don't care. It's a mutual understanding that we can interact with each other. Torah is much more than just mutual understanding so we can Hebrew. Sorry. It's much more than just mutual understanding so we can interact with each other. There's actually levels of depth to the letters and to the words and to all the things itself. So, since God wrote each letter specifically how he wanted it, every single letter in the Torah can be interpreted in endless ways. So let's just start with the beginning. The first letter is, and you recognize that letter? Know what it's called? Beis, Bet, right? Doesn't have the down the middle there, it does, but this is called the Beis, which is the second letter. It's called Aleph Bet. The Hebrew alphabet is called Alphabet. Alphabet is actually a derivative of Alphabet. 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 Okay. So Alphabet. So Bet is the second letter of the alphabet. So why does the Torah start with Bet, second letter of the alphabet? This is a question you can only ask on the Hebrew language. I don't know any other language that works with this. You can have probably an entire book written on why the Torah starts with the Bet.
I think I remember hearing somewhere it starts with that because it's a letter that's open on one side. I don't remember where I heard that. Maybe it was a former rabbi or something, but I remember it because it's open on one side.
Okay, great answer.
Isn't the base?
These eyes open.
Base, and then the last word of the Torah ends with a different.
The last
letter.
word ends the Lamed. There's actually a few books, entire books, written on why it starts with the Bet and ends the Lamed. Amazing. So one answer is, share with you a thought, that the reason it starts with the Bet is because Bet is the second letter, right? Aleph is the first letter. Bet is the second letter. As a concept in Hebrew also, each letter has a numerical value. The first letter is 1, second letter is 2. Why does it start with 2? Because since this is the verse, that this is starting the world now, right? This is introducing creation. We're now starting creation of the world. In the beginning, God created, right? So what do we start with? The first letter itself hints towards the creation of the world. How does it do that? How does the Bet do that? Because since the Bet is 2, it's the first 2 really, meaning the creation of the world really created a concept of 2. Because in the beginning, before there was a world, there was just God, which is pure unity, pure oneness. It was just an infinite, can't really imagine such a thing, but it was kind of an infinite nothingness, or everythingness. But once they were created, God kind of created a finite world where there's distinct parts to things. You can then have a concept of 2, right? 2 is a term that you can only exist when you have finite things that are separable and measurable and different. So the Torah, in the first letter of the Torah, is already hinting towards the concept that God is now first creating, so to speak, something that is There's no real good way to say this, but like in addition to himself, so to speak. Or he's creating a world that appears to be outside of himself or different than himself. Right? So the letter itself of Beis is itself displaying the concept of creation. Right? That's part of the depth of the Hebrew language. Another reason they say it's a Beis is because Beis is 2, which signifies you never know the Torah. You're never going to know the Torah enough. You have to review it a second time. You read it once, you think you know it. The Torah is telling you right when you start, don't think just because you learned it once that you're going to know it. We all learn stories, Noah's Ark and Abraham and Sarah and the plagues, and you have to read it again. Don't just think because you heard it once when you were a young kid that you're going to still have the proper understanding. So the Beis teaches us, remember to go over it again. Do it a second time. Don't stop at one. So that is a cool thing in the Hebrew language. Now, one other cool thing in the Hebrew language, to show you something that another great rabbi says, is God's creating the world here, right? This is our introduction to creation, the first verse. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, how long is this creation going to be for? How long did God create the world? How long are we here for? Anyone know? The Torah says about that?
7 days.
What's
No,
it?
6 days, then 7 days. He rested.
That's the amount of days in creation. There were 7 days, God used 7 days to create the world.
Well,
But how long is this world going to exist for? Meaning, what was this creation's purpose? How long will this creation exist for in Jewish?
Well, I think also like what's a day like in God's time, because that might be completely different than to what we think of as
Perfect.
20. Like
Perfect.
to
This is
us,
like the
24
introduction to,
hours
like-
is a day, but like when you're all powerful and all being, like it could be whatever.
Totally. That is a good point when we get to that. When we get to verse 5, probably next class. Verse 5 says that that's where it first comes out the day of Yom. It says by Boker. It was evening, it was morning, the first day. Or not true. It was evening, it was morning, day 1. So there, when it says day 1, we're going to discuss there. Well, what does it mean day 1? What's a day? It wasn't even the sun and the moon yet. We'll get there next class. But how could you have a day if there's no sun and the moon? So in this verse, again, the Torah is introducing creation. How long was this? So the Jewish thought actually says, time that no one's heard this before, the world will exist for 6,000 years. Anyone ever heard that before? No one's heard that before. Okay, 6,000 years. Or I've heard that before. Okay, and what year are we in now?
57, 76.
Yeah.
5776, right? So we are now in the year 5776, and of a 6,000 year world, which then and then again 1,000 years of Shabbos, so to speak. Again, similar to we find a lot of times in Judaism we have the 6 days of the week and then the 7th day of Shabbos. We have that in Shemitah, we have that in the Yovel cycle, we have that in the world's creation also. So an amazing thing about the Hebrew language also is that there's a lot of words that are similar roots. Like you find 2 words that have the same root word. There's always 3 letters in the root of a Hebrew word. And sometimes I find words that have different meanings when they're used with other like variable letters inside of it, but the roots are the same. And the concept in Judaism is, since the language is divine, that there's always some connection between words that have the same root. There's always a connection between them. And you find, again, lots of people discussing this today. So there's the letter Aleph is the first letter in the Torah. Not Torah. It's the first letter in the alphabet. Right? Aleph is the first letter. The word Aleph doesn't really mean anything, it's just the name of a letter. There's another word with the exact same letter, which means Aleph. The word Aleph, which is spelled the exact same way, means, you know what it means? Aleph? It means 1,000. It's the Hebrew word for 1,000. So, there was a great rabbi, I think it was a Gra, I'm not sure, who pointed out that there are, how many Alephs in the first sentence? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 Alephs in the first sentence. He explained that every Aleph represents 1 Aleph, right? 1,000 years. And the Torah itself is hinting to you that in this creation, that God's creating the heavens and the earth, this creation will exist for 6,000 years. And that's already hinted to in the first verse itself. Okay, so this is just kind of appreciating all the nuances of the Hebrew language. You can go on, there's books. It's like amazing just to see details of the Hebrew language, different ways of interpreting and understanding it. What's that?
We're almost at the end.
We're all.
Yeah, that's thinking that like what happens when it gets to
We're
6,000?
200.
Yeah, exactly. So all you have to do is, find the fountain of youth for a few hundred more years and you make it. What?
What's at the end?
1,000 years of Shabbos. It's amazing. Steve's just looking for 1 year off,
Who's
And then
gonna
you got
cook on
1,000. It'd be awesome.
that? You can't cook on Shabbos.
God's gonna give you food, don't worry, you'll have plenty of food. Okay, so I just want to quickly recap and then we'll end for this class. First thing we spoke about is written and oral law is the Jewish Bible. The Jewish Bible is distinguishable union, partnership of the written and the oral law. It has to be like that because it's the system of applying the written word of God to all of our world today. Torah is God's mind. It's how we understand how God thinks. It allows us to become great. And the purpose is to instruct us in life to mold ourselves to become great people. Then spoke about E equals MC squared, the concept that there's an infinite amount of energy holding all matter together, which is kind of an unexplainable scientific reality, that if you kind of see it as God, it's somewhat of a proof of God that God is this kind of energy holding the whole world together. We discussed 4 IDs for identification that God placed, which is unique to Jewish religion, that he placed in the Torah. There are more, as we said. The 4 IDs were the split hooves and shooter cut, the fish, everything that has scales has fins, the going up to the temple, you will not get attacked by your neighboring nations, and the laws of the sabbatical year of Shemitah. And last but not least, the depth of the Hebrew language. Appreciate that the divinity in the Hebrew language itself, and therefore as we now approach the next week, we're going to go much more understanding the actual text of the Torah with this introduction. Let's give you a very good perspective now as we start it to really try to figure out, like you said last time, what is a day? How does the God created it? What was the beginning? Is it the Big Bang? A lot of big questions are going to come up. We now can properly delve into them. As always, I love questions. I think they're great. And that's it for today. Thank you everyone for coming.